Hey, and thanks for tuning in. I wanted to take a moment and explain some of the information about a game that I've created called Epic Wizard Wars. And essentially, it's a game that we use for studying, kind of like a study session right before we take our exams. I've gotten a lot of good feedback about it from students over the years. It's made some changes and improvements as we've gone along, and I'm kind of happy with the product that it's become. Um, and I've kind of gotten known as that I'm that teacher that plays that fun game, take his class, and so I'm kind of happy about that. But essentially, I base this off of Harry Potter and the Four Houses of Hogwarts. So essentially, the students will be divided more or less randomly into one of the four houses, and that is going to be their team for the remainder of the year. Um, and on study session days, I have my room set up. I'll rearrange the room. The desks in my room are kind of smaller, and it's like small tables essentially, and I'm able to push them around. I use some desks for dividers, but essentially I put one desk in the middle, and I put up to 7 or 8 chairs around that one table, and that's kind of their center point for that house. And then there'll be 4 of those around the room, one for each house. And when they come in and they see the rooms moved around, they know where to go. Um, Once they get there, essentially at their table is a little cup, and I have glued it down to a piece of foam so that way it doesn't tip over very easily. And I even went and put a little label on each one, and I color code everything in the class. So blue for Ravenclaw, red for Gryffindor, yellow for Hufflepuff, and green for the Slytherin. And I have the little emblems that I printed out. I just tape on there, so they're all color coded and they know where to go. And inside of this cup, there's going to be a pencil, and again, it's color coded, so I give them a blue one. There's going to be some scratch paper for them to be able to write down their answers and or how many points they're going to bet on that answer. And so that's going to be found in there. And the other thing they're going to find is going to be their spell cards. And again, they're color coded, so I printed out a blue set, a green set, a red set, and a yellow set, and each group gets their own. And this is what I use to keep up with which group submitted them, and also you can keep up with how many uses they get of each one, because all of their uses are in here, and once they've turned them all in, and I collect them during the game, then they don't get those back. So they don't have to, they have to strategize as to which spells they're going to use when. So for this game, essentially, I ask one question to the entire class, and generally it's a question that comes from the exam, or it's a variation of a question that comes from an exam. I do not give them any options for answers. They are allowed to, once I finish asking the question, they're allowed to quietly discuss the answer with the rest of their housemates, their teammates. They can then agree upon what answers that they're going to use. They write the answer down, and then they bet a number of points, either 2, 3, or 4 points. If they're not really sure, they can bet 2. If they feel fairly confident, they can bet 4. In the end, it doesn't matter. They cannot lose points for getting a question wrong, but they can lose points from spell effects. So sometimes they want to bet more, sometimes they bet less, and then they can decide what spell they want to submit in with that answer. And so they just write the answer down on these little slips, how many points they're going to bet, and they put a spell card with it. I give them a couple minutes to discuss the answers, to kind of strategize, and I'm usually dressed up as like in my Harry Potter robes. I got my Ravenclaw robes. I sport those on those days. You just got a wand in my pocket just for fun. And I walk around the room. They may have a couple questions. I just repeat the question. I don't really try to help them with any answers. And they get used to that, and they'll stop asking me after a while. And then I'll say, all right, I need everybody's answers, final answer, and then I walk around and I pick up the spell card and the answer sheet from each house. Now for the setup of my room, I have essentially it's an Elmo, which is like a video overhead projector. So I can lay something down flat on a counter. Overhead will be a camcorder, and it projects that image up onto the screen. And essentially, that's where I keep score. I'll lay down the spell cards on the side, And then across from their spell card, I'll put the answer for that house. So the red spell card, that'll be, then I'll put the Gryffindor answer, and so forth and so on. So we look at the spells first to see, oh, what spells were put down. Let's see what people put, and I make a big deal about it. And I'll like, oh, they put down this one, and oh, they cast this spell, and so forth and so on. I say, now let's see who got the answers right. And I'll put the answers down and just kind of read them out without saying yes or no. Some of them are obviously wrong. Some of them are obviously right. And I'll say, so-and-so put this for an answer, and they bet 4 points, and they said this for an answer. Okay, and then once I get done, I'll say, well, now let's see who's right. And then I'll see what the correct answer is. And they're like, oh, I got it right, or oh, I got it wrong. And at that point, I'll start working towards the score and seeing how many points they're going to get. Now, the spells modify how many points they get, and they also modify how many points other teams can get. And some of them do special things where they have certain actions that teams have to take in order to try and get to keep their points, essentially. But I write everything down, and it's just a scratched piece of paper. I just make a chart. I put Ravenclaw, Gryffindors, Hufflepuff, and Slytherin, and then I just draw columns down, and I just add the math up as we go, essentially. It's important to note that students start off each game that I do. I have 4 exams, so I do 4 of these games across the year. The points that they get from each are held separately, but they're added up at the end. So if they're on their second game and they lose points and they're already at 0, they can't go below 0. So it's not I'm going to go back and take points away from another game that we played. I would simply just say, okay, you're still at 0, but they can't go below 0. Nobody wants a negative score. That's just kind of demoralizes them a little bit. And a lot of the stuff that I have doesn't really necessarily take points away, but it stops them from getting points. So at the end of a study session, I'll just add up the points, essentially, and keep a tally as I go, write it down, and then I just keep a spreadsheet that I show them that has each of my classes with each of the houses and what their points are for each of the study sessions, and we add it up and say, so far, congratulations to Hufflepuff, you won this session, but overall, Gryffindor is 2 points ahead. It's easy to get caught up as long as they study. Because this game is, if nothing else, it is based on if you don't get a right answer, lots of times your spell won't take effect. So the easiest way to get points is to actually have correct answers. So studying is going to help. So just kind of take you through some of the information that I'm going to send. Here is a list of all the houses. So when I do the sorting, when I sort them on the first day, I have the sorting cap, and the one that mine is, it has a little battery pack in it. And, it doesn't have any batteries. It has like the lights up and whatnot. But I lay it on its side, and I just put essentially a bowl on the inside. And inside this bowl are these individual house names. So they're cut to where it's just like a little strip, and they're folded so that way they can't see them. So it's random as to what they're going to pick. So I would print this out, I would cut this entire column out, I would fold that column in half, and then I'd cut out each of the individual little house names and put them into the hat. You want to be careful though whenever you have let's say I think there's 24 on this. Sometimes I'll need have less students, like if I only have 20 in a class. If that's the case, I don't want to put all 24 in there, because there's a chance that all the ones that are left may be heavily, may represent a good point of a particular house. For example, one year learning this, one year I cut them all out, and everybody was drawing everything and got done, and there was only one person in Slytherin. And I looked over and said, how did that happen? And just by chance, they had drawn everything, and the ones that were left were the remaining Slytherins. And so it kind of really skewed the numbers. And I had some people volunteer to go over, so it ended up being fine. But I like to kind of avoid that. I prefer to have it more random as to which house they're going to be in. But here's a list of all the houses, and I just have a couple columns of it, so you can print it once for multiple classes and whatnot. I don't always write down who's in what house afterwards, but that wouldn't be a bad thing to do. Generally speaking, we just play with who's ever there, and on the last day, whoever wins the house cup, essentially, if they're not there, then they don't get a house cup. So you got to be there to win. Here is the template I use for printing out what's going to go on the cup. Right, so I have a font for Harry Potter on another computer where I made this. This computer does not have that, so it's not showing it in it, but there is the Ravenclaw, there's Gryffindor, and this is a Word document, so you can edit it all you need to. So Hufflepuff and for Slytherin, and so that's what I'll print out and essentially put on this. So when I said that there's spells that we did, so earlier on when I was kind of first coming up with the concept of this game, I had spells, but there weren't spell cards, and because of the way that we played the game, there were different spells than we have now. So I've kind of fine-tuned it down to 7 really good spells that work well for pretty much for the strategy that we use for the class. So the spells essentially have a resolve order to them, because some spells would need to happen before other spells take place. So since every group is essentially, I'm revealing their answers all at the same time, they don't have the chance to say something before another group does, or what have you. So I have to put a resolve order on the cards. Some cards are always going to be done first if they're played, and these are generally the protection cards. And the reason why is if they're protected, we want to remove them from the board, so that way, if anybody, for their spell effect, they may get to choose a house. Well, if you're protected, you can't get chosen. So we want to pull that off, so that way it kind of limits the options for the other house, so that way they can strategize better, so they'll know who they're able to choose. So Expecto Patronums and Felix Felicis are the 2 cards. I give 2 chances, or 2 spell uses for Expecto Patronum, and it's simply for that. For Expecto Patronum, you still answer, you still submit points like before. If you get it right, you get those points. If not, you don't get those points. You don't lose any points, but you simply get removed from the board, so that way no one else can hurt you. You're protected, so you know you're not going to lose any points that turn. And I get 2 charges of that. Felix Felicis, this is liquid luck. You do not have to submit an answer at all. You don't have to put bet points or submit an answer at all. You could just turn in this card. It's liquid luck. You're gonna get some points. And essentially, I use a D4 to determine how many points they're gonna get. So D4, if you don't have one, you could probably use a D6. And but I would definitely say nothing bigger than that. A D4 works great because it gives them up to 4 points, which is a pretty good amount. If you don't, you can buy D&D dice. You can buy dice like this at Walmart. If not, I'm sure there's a gaming store in your area where you could find a whole set of dice. It wouldn't be a bad thing to have. So I would use the D4 for that. And they get however many points they roll on the D4 is how many points they get. So it's liquid luck. They can get 1 through 4. We never know, but at least they're going to get some. But then afterwards, they get pulled off the board, so they're protected. For the rest of their spells, you'll notice at the bottom it says resolve, and it says same thing down here. This one resolves before any other spells resolve. This one is going to resolve next. So the resolve, and it says 1, that's in the order of resolution. So if everything else is on the board and this one has a 1 and nothing else says remove it beforehand, then you would resolve this card first. So in Gorgio, they definitely have to submit an answer, and they have to bet points. If their answer is correct, they get double the number of points that they bet. So if they bet 4, they would get 8. But if their answer is incorrect, they're going to lose the number of points they bet, which is 4, plus 1, so they'd actually lose 5 points. Again, they can't go below 0. They do not lose double the amount of points. They wouldn't lose 8 points in this case. The math on that is too tremendous for them to catch up at certain points. So it just works better when we don't double the loss. So they lose what they bet plus 1, so they lose 5 if they bet 4 points. And I give 3 charges of Engorgio. They don't really need more than that.